Welcome to the Storycraft Cafe. Come in, grab a cup of your favorite beverage, and get ready to join the storytelling conversation. Storycraft Cafe is brought to you by Dabble, the ultimate cloud-based fiction writing software. Here we're going to bring together storytellers from all walks to encourage and empower you to craft your best story.
Hello everyone, my name is Grace and I am the cafe manager over here at the Storycraft Cafe. I'm here to personally invite you to come check out the Storycraft Cafe if you haven't already been by. There is so much happening in the cafe this month. We are running live events with authors, doing group writing sprints, and talking a lot about the ins and outs of writing, the joys and the woes. If this sounds like fun, stop by for a cozy digital beverage at storycraft.cafe. That's STORYCRAFT.CAFE. I can't wait to see you all there.
Well, thanks for tuning in once again to the Storycraft Cafe. We have a phenomenal guest for you today. David Koepp joins us on the show. You might not be familiar with David's prose just yet, but I promise you've seen one of the blockbuster films that he has written the screenplay for and that you have spent your hard-earned money at the movie theater watching. What an amazing storyteller, and we're so happy to have him in the Storycraft Cafe today. Before we get over to David, though, let's hear from Brad Parks talk about character development. We're talking a lot about character development this month in the Storycraft Cafe, and this was a great piece of a conversation I had a while back, and we're talking about character motivations and getting a character to do on the page what you think they should, or maybe it's all about letting the characters be who they are. A fun conversation. Let's pick up a piece of that, and then we'll bounce over to David Koepp.
Every time I try to give a character a trajectory, Hank, they have other ideas about it. And I have come to trust in my characters and believe that if I know who they are and I let them act organically, it will actually work out better than if I try to force something. And oftentimes, even down to the nitty-gritty level of writing a scene, I often find that when I'm writing a scene and it's not working, and I'm very stubborn, so I keep at it and it's still not working, and it's still not working, and eventually I stop and go, what the hell is going on here? Why I'm not a half-bad writer? Why can't I make this scene work? Inevitably, it's because I am trying to make a character do something they don't want to do. So I've really learned the wisdom over the years of listening to the characters and trusting them. And in this case, actually, the twist that's about 2/3 of the way through Unthinkable that I just love, this is the twist that I've been hoping my readers could get their hands on for a year and a half, came out of character. It came out of me asking, gosh, why is he or she acting this way? And I don't want to give too much away, but it almost became like a problem I had to solve. Like, why is the character doing this? And then I went, oh my gosh, I know why they're doing that. It's because of X, right? And if I hadn't been listening to the characters and I hadn't been thinking through the situations I had put them in and then thinking about how would they naturally react, I never would have had that twist. So that's why for me, it ultimately comes down to almost like putting my own ego aside and letting the character be the boss and then following the character.
Today I'm super excited to have David Koepp on the show with me. He has a phenomenal new book. It's called Aurora, and this is a book that you've got to have for your summer reading. If you are not as familiar with David's prose work, I know that you're familiar with stories that he's told up on the big screen. So many of them, too many to list right now. But he is a storyteller that you are familiar with, even if you don't realize it at the first. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Hank. Nice to be here.
David, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
there's a moment I can get to, but I went to, I had terrible penmanship. I went to a Catholic, and the nuns. Sorry, Hank. I think we have to start over. I'm getting really bad feedback on your end.
Is it still feeding back?
Let me see. No, now it stopped.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Do you want to do an edit or?
Yeah, I'll clip that out. No worries. Just pick up from where you were, and I'll cut that out.
Okay. When I grew up, I had terrible penmanship. I went to this Catholic elementary school, and the nuns tried it for a few years and then told me to give up. No one would ever be able to read my handwriting. They weren't wrong. And my dad brought a typewriter home from his office, I remember, and also a little typing table to put it on, like a little metal thing that you could raise or lower. And I remember being about 10 and just sort of banging away at the typewriter. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to put letters on the page, they might as well be words, and those words might as well be sentences. So I started to write a very short story about some misunderstood 10-year-old whose nuns were mean to him. And then I wrote a story about, some misunderstood 12-year-old who had to go away to summer camp and didn't want to. And then I'd write stories about misunderstood teenage boys who were misunderstood by the young women that he loved. And
I'm detecting a pattern here.
Yeah. And I just found it a great relief. It was fun. It never occurred to me that you could do that for a living. It was just a fun thing that I would type at sometimes. And then when I got older, I wanted to be an actor. In high school, I was in a lot of plays and stuff. But I kept writing as well. And it was at some point during college that I realized, I could go on and try to be an actor and hope that people cast me in things, even though I'm not nearly as good as a lot of other people and not nearly as good looking as a lot of other people. Or I could try to be a writer because I don't need anybody's permission to start a story. So I think I was around 20 when I shifted my interests officially.
So I've talked to a lot of frustrated actors, we'll just put it that way, that have wound up writing prose or screenplays or a combination of both. Is there a difference when, and of course there is, but if you could talk a little bit about what the difference is in being a part of the collaborative process, like as an actor, to then being the person that is in control of everything as you're writing the story. How does that difference feel?
Well, it's huge. It's huge. I would also look to the difference in screenwriting and novel writing,
Sure.
which is similar to what you just referred to. When you're screenwriting, which I've done for 35 years, so I'm familiar with it. In fact, it was all I was used to for a very long time. When you're screenwriting, you have a lot of collaborators. There is a brief period, if it's an original, of quiet and solitude where you're making up your story and writing the first couple drafts. Then, however, you start to get opinions, and some are opinions of friends. You're looking to make it better. But then there's also the opinions of people that you would hope to collaborate with, the director, people who might buy it, people who might give you tens of millions of dollars to make it, actors, designers. There's an enormous amount of input. I like to say that in screenwriting, you're not so much collaborated with as collaborated upon. And when I wrote my first novel in 2000, I wrote it in 2018. So I was already in my mid-50s and had been a screenwriter for a long time, but I'd never tried a novel. And I was just giddy. After a few pages, I realized not only can I do whatever I want, because no one even knows I'm writing this, so there's no expectations, but I can write in whatever style I want. And the tools that are available to me as a would-be novelist are so vastly different from what's available to me as a screenwriter. You know, in screenplays, you can really only fairly refer to what an audience could see or what they could hear. That's it. So referring to the inner life of a character is just verboten. There's no way for a director to express it. You can say that, you know, the character looks at some flowers and sighs deeply if you want to say that they're feeling wistful, but you can't say he felt wistful and remembered his grandmother. I mean, you just can't.
Right.
But in a book, not only do you have complete access to the thoughts and feelings of your characters, but you also are free to digress. And, you know, movies are relentless. Even slow-paced movies still, you know, must bow at the altar of story progression. And novels, you only need a general sense of being pulled along toward a goal in order to put up with it, because you can always put it down and go have dinner and come back and read more later.
When you have written quite a number of original scripts, things that you dreamt up completely on your own, as well as some I'm blanking on the word, where you take someone else's story idea and then you know, whip a screenplay out of that. What are the do you approach the beginning of those projects differently? Of course you do, because one, you're getting input and feedback from someone else about what the story idea is going to be, and the other, you know, things are just organically coming out of nowhere from wherever stories come from. How does the beginning of those processes differ?
It's a lot slow on an original. The gestational period is a lot slower. You have the seed of an idea. Something happens to you. You read an article somewhere. You meet somebody who says something interesting. You know, anything can be the germination of an idea. And then in my case anyway, I'm not sure how others do it, but I keep a story file on my email files. And you know, anytime I have an idea, I just park it. I write it in email to myself and park it there. And if I get more ideas on the same subject, I bust it out into its own file and keep adding to it. And it's usually a couple years before I'll then decide to write that story, because it's just gotta sit there and grow for a while in your subconscious. With an adaptation, so you know, a truck pulls up and puts an oak tree in your driveway, and now you got to plant it and make sure it lives and turn it into an oak tree that fits in that yard. So you've had the benefit of several years, or in some cases several decades, of someone else's thinking. So this thing shows up, and rather than using your, you know, powers as a creative artist, you're using your skills as an adaptive artist, and that's just very different. A whole bunch of thinking in the case of a novel, or you know, a comic book series, or a television show, or whatever people adapt things from. You've got a whole bunch of thinking that shows up fully formed in that medium, and your challenge really is, how might this relate to the medium of film? So you got your tool belt on instead of your you know, magic wand to try to conjure something up.
Right. In major projects that you've been involved in, like Jurassic Park, for instance, the feedback mechanism of that is, how does that different from the feedback you get as a novelist? For instance, when a movie comes out like that, you generally have 2 or 3 hours, and the initial feedback starts coming in after 2 or 3 hours. If you have a novel, it may be more like a week or so as people digest the work, and usually it's individual people, as opposed to large groups of people that are consuming it at a time. What does that feel like when you have done all of the work you can on this thing and it now goes out into the world? What is the difference in getting, waiting for that initial feedback for a movie as opposed to that initial feedback for a novel?
The first thing that springs to mind is that there's no difference, because my friend John Kamps, who's a writer and very funny, says anytime he writes anything, including just one graceful sentence, he starts the clock waiting for the praise train to pull into the station. We all want everybody to see our stuff or read our stuff and tell us how much they loved it and how it changed their life. That's what we're looking for. Every novelist, every screenwriter, every artist is a youngest, just waiting to be praised. So there's that. Specifically to what you asked, there's an immediacy to a movie reaction, especially a movie that's going to be in theaters. This is changing, of course, but a movie opens on a certain weekend. If it's a popular movie, lots of people go. You can go yourself and listen and watch and see how they react. So it's very immediate. I don't know any novelist who sits and watches someone read their book. You as you pointed out, it takes a while, and the reactions come in over time and from individuals. And so, but like everything in the book world, you need patience. It takes a long time to write a book. It takes a long time to edit. It takes a long time for it to then come out, and it takes a while for people to react. So,
right.
I do love the rush of being able to watch a movie with an audience if it's playing well. If the movie doesn't really work, it's torture, and it's the most masochistic thing you can possibly do, is go watch it with an audience. But that's also changing because movies are now often directly for streaming.
Right.
The last movie I did was called KIMI. It's a suspense thing for HBO Max that Steven Soderbergh directed, and it plays great. But I've seen it with a group once or twice because I took it to a couple film festivals, and it plays great. But the primary audience for that is sitting on their living room couch, and I can't go look through their windows.
Legally, right. That could raise some eyebrows. David, you mentioned when you're writing an original script that the gestational period is different, and I love that terminology. It's very pregnant with meaning, if you will, if you'll pardon the pun. Is that the same for writing a novel? Do the ideas come from the same place?
Sorry, I interrupted you. I wanted to say that's just running with a metaphor. I respect.
Oh man, do novel ideas come in the same way that screenplay ideas come?
Yes, I think so. I think all ideas are kind of born equal, and then it's up to you to decide where does this belong.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we live in a world where there are an increasing number of ways to tell your story. I had an idea for a story a couple of years ago that I wrote, and it was about probably 60 pages of prose.
Okay.
Which is far too long for a short story, far too short for a novel.
Right.
But I felt I had told the whole story. It also wasn't particularly suited to a movie. So I sold it to Audible, which was great. Kevin Bacon read it. It's about a 2-hour story. I got some very nice feedback on it. And I was delighted that there's a medium for this story.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a blossoming world in that regard, and people do seem to have an endless appetite for storytelling.
Well, it's interesting because, audiobooks had been around forever, back to books on tape. And even before that, radio dramas. So there's always been this sort of medium that lends itself to that sort of production, I guess. But over the last 5 years, probably, audiobooks have just exploded. And I've wondered, what that is. Is it because we all have these phones in our pocket with a lot of storage and easy ways to download those from Audible, and headphones are so light and available? Do you attribute this kind of boom in the audio form of storytelling to anything in particular?
So the very things you mentioned, I think that it's easy to play them.
Yeah.
And I used to get there was a thing called books on tape back in the early 90s, late 80s.
Yeah.
Books on tape. There's only one books on tape. And I used to drive around, but if I lived in LA when I was younger, and so there's a lot of driving involved, and I'd have a case with 8 cassette tapes that contained whatever book on tape I was listening to, and then later there'd be DVDs, and then there were no more books on tape. Not DVDs, there'd be CDs, audio CDs.
Right.
But it was a pain in the ass, and it's a lot of things to lug around with you, and then what do you do with it once you listen to it? Throw it out. You can't record over them. So suddenly, in the last, or not so suddenly, but recently, it's become incredibly easy. And I both buy the audiobook and buy the regular book because I want to read it in my hands, but I would also like to continue it when I drive home from dropping a kid off at school, or I go jogging, or I go for a long walk. I want to be able to continue the story. So it became easy to do so. So I think I'm the author's best friend. Sometimes I buy it a third time for my iPad. In bed.
Well, it's interesting because for preparing for this show, a lot of times we'll get an ARC from the publisher, an advanced reader's copy, and either as a physical book, or Kindle editions over the last several years have kind of exploded, and that makes it very easy to manage large amounts of books coming in, but increasingly more publishers are sending audio ARCs, and man, does that make it wonderful for preparing for shows, because you can be doing other things while you've got headphones in, listening to the book, and it really allows you to multitask. And so as someone who has been in the medium of visual storytelling, from writing screenplays to also writing novels, and now maybe even writing things that you have in mind that this will make a great audio adaptation. What other frontiers can you keep exploring as a storyteller?
Well, that's a good question. I feel like the frontiers are infinite within the media that we have at our disposal already. You can make up any kind of story you like. I'm not so good at predicting what the next form of storytelling will be. And when I've become convinced that I am, I'm usually wrong. I remember in the mid-90s, there was a great panic in the Writers Guild because interactive CD-ROMs were going to be the next big thing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Everybody's going to want this. Everybody's going to want to be able to choose their own story path. You've got to be able to write a story that has 8 paths and figure all those out. And in fact, it turned out no one wants that. No one.
Right.
That seems like a lot of work. What they
Yeah.
would like is for you to tell one story competently. That's all they ask.
Right.
Not 8 poorly that they have to work on. But it was a genuine fear at the time. Is this where it's all going? I don't think it changes that very much for how much it changes. The stories still have to have a beginning, middle, and end. They generally follow 3 acts. Even television series, they generally follow 3 acts, and that's what you got to come up with. And there's a number of ways to tell that.
Right.
Lengths, formats, and media.
Right. If you read a screenplay and then read a novelization of that screenplay, they read very differently. The screenplay is very dialogue heavy, with almost no description, or there will be description, but it's very to the point, and it really gives direction for the director and other people involved in the process to interpret that and to do all of the visual things that we're going to see on the screen. Whereas if you're reading the novelization of that, it is your job as the writer to build that world, if you will. When writing, well, first off, when you decide that this is going to be a screenplay or a novel, do you start thinking about those differences in the way you're going to tell the story and what you are going to tell the reader?
Oh, certainly. Just the way you would drive differently on an interstate and a country road. You must bring a different style to each format. I dispute your point a little in that good screenplays aren't dialogue heavy. They have just the right amount of dialogue, and they should contain a fair amount of description. But as you point out, that description needs to be terse and really evocative. You have to choose your words sparingly, and they really got to mean something. They are hard to read screenplays. You're asking a writer to imagine a scene. You're not laying it out in lovely prose for them. You're describing things and asking them to move through this at about the pace at which a movie would move past their eyes, right? The old credo is a screenplay page is usually equal to about a minute of screen time. And for the most part, that holds true. So you as a screenwriter need to amend your style to keep it Hemingway-esque so that the reader can get through these pages and not get bogged down. When you turn a page in a script and you see that the next page has 0 dialogue but 5 long paragraphs of description, it's just a terrible feeling. It's very depressing and it's hard to go on. So that kind of terse screenwriting style, terse yet evocative, is really important. And I think that I work hard on that. And sometimes I think that my style being fairly easy to read has overcome deficiencies in the story sometimes because people can stay with the movie a little bit. That's not, I don't have deficient stories on purpose, and hopefully I go back and fix them. But that's a crucial difference.
Our online community, the Storycraft Cafe, we're talking a lot this month about character development, and looking back on your previous screen work and then looking at Aurora, your new novel, the characters are very front and center. It's the old adage, you can have all of the plot in the world and dynamic things happen, but if you don't have characters that people care about, then none of that matters. Are there things that you have in mind when you start imagining characters and start casting the story in your mind? If that analogy is okay, are there things that you think about how you're going to make this character so that the reader or the viewer will buy in and will care about this character?
Oh, certainly. To me, that's the joy of writing books, is the opportunity to delve more deeply into character. Certainly, we all know movies where characters are deeply expressed and beautifully performed, and we connect with them. But in a book, as a writer, I find I get to meet the character more and more as I go on. So I outline less when I write a book than I would for a screenplay, because I'm trying to meet the character where they are and let them grow and let them make some decisions, not in some weird way where I'm channeling anybody, but as you write, you're pulling things out of yourself, because every character is basically you. Even the bad guys, they're you as you wish you could be, probably. So you're pulling things out of yourself, and hopefully when those things are true, people will relate to them.
When You talked about that gestational period when you're writing a screenplay that's new, and you said that the same beginning of the process happens when you're writing a novel. What comes first for you? Do the characters come first? Do you start? Some is it? I'm fascinated by the beginnings of things. At one moment, a project like Aurora doesn't exist whatsoever. But then either you read, a news article or see something on television, or something happens and that what if game starts playing in your head. And then, either characters walk onto the stage of your mind or you start, casting this what if scenario with people. And then in one way or another, Aurora does exist. And then it's your job as the writer to kind of dig that story out and polish it up and all of that, all the things that make it into a story. What comes first for you? Is it the characters? Is it a situation? How does it usually unfold?
I would love to say the character comes first because I feel like that's what the great writers of books and movies say and have experience. But it's not the case for me. I get an idea. I think probably one of the most influential shows for me and many writers of my generation is the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
Twilight Zones. And those are all based on a great what if idea. And I've always been deeply charmed by a what if idea. And then, but quickly on the heels of the what if idea, I think, now who is either the best or the worst person to have this happen to? I don't want anybody in between. I want somebody who's completely prepared for this and we watch them handle it, or they're completely unprepared for this and we watch them not handle this. And so in the case of Aurora, I thought, well, what about one of each? And let's see how their paths may diverge or come together. So we get the sister who is completely unprepared for this disaster, and her extremely wealthy brother who is totally over-prepared, and then watch their paths cross.
Cross is a fun way of putting it. At its heart, Aurora, when you first look at it, looks like a disaster novel. And it is creepily relevant today because, with rising gas prices and a lot of uncertainty at various places in the world, and the possibility of some of these things affecting us on a daily basis seem to be ratcheting up, and it's very plausible. But at the heart of it, that while that's happening in Aurora, and it's very believable, what's really happening is a story about two siblings, like you said, and the kind of the world coming to an end story, if you will, is really just a backdrop for this sibling story. How did the idea for to kind of have this brother and sister who are very different and coming at this situation from very different places, yet having that sibling bond and this thing that holds them together, that makes for a fascinating exploration of this sort of end of the world story. How did that idea to have this family connection, where did that come from?
Well, I knew early on the idea of the a coronal mass ejection from the sun that knocks out power all over the globe. That's the idea that underlines the book, right? Or that starts the book. And I knew early on I can't write what's going on in the whole world, and I don't want to.
Right.
It'll be some sprawling disaster thing that we've seen a million times. So I thought, I want to tell this story, but the only way to tell it successfully, in my opinion, is to narrow its focus. And I'm helped by the fact that since power's out, communications are out. No one can watch TV and look for updates. No one can call their friend and ask what's going on. Nobody can go on the internet and see what's going on and see YouTube from all over the world. So everything becomes extremely local very quickly.
Very quickly.
And that helps me because now I can study the way these two separate communities, one the sisters community and the other the wealthy brothers self-made community. I can watch these two communities and see how they come together or fall apart. And, I think that approach of taking a ground level personal view to a massive worldwide event is not unique to me. I mean, H.G. Wells did a similar thing in his War of the Worlds novel. That makes it all seem much more real and relatable. And then you never have to have a shot of, the Eiffel Tower burning or something, which I think is people have seen enough of that kind of thing.
Right. What's interesting is I've talked to thriller writers and people that write those sorts of stories that have resorted to setting stories back in the 70s and 80s before a lot of technology has evolved the way it is now, for the simple fact that it's harder and harder to tell stories where someone all they have to do is pick up a cell phone and call for help, or text someone or use GPS tracking, and so when you remove that technology, all of a sudden your storytelling becomes very different. You mentioned that in the story it goes from a very broad worldwide scenario to very local very quickly. What did that do for you to be able to remove all of the distractions of modern life and get right down to the heart of the character?
It's just a gift. It was the fact that not only can someone just text someone else when they're upset with them, but they do, and they would, instead of going and finding them and talking to them. It's a pox, to write a book or a film where you don't have to think about somebody's phone, or if you're making a film, you don't have to shoot inserts of a phone or a computer. It's so boring. It's our daily life. We all love it and hate it profoundly. And to put it in our art and entertainment is sad. So having the power go out was just fantastic. Somebody's got a satellite phone and it happens to work, but they were limited to 2 phone calls in the whole story, I think. So that was great. I wrote a story recently that set in World War II, and it was another just a joy because you don't know where people are. They leave, they say they're going away and they'll be back soon, and you hope they come back, and then they have an adventure and they come back and they say, "You won't believe what happened to me." Instead of texting you every step of the way, "OMG, these Nazis, hate them." It's a real, it calls figuring out how does this character not use their phone is as big a writing challenge these days as the old thriller challenge of why don't they call the police? Right.
How did the sibling relationship come to you? Because that's a very interesting dynamic between these characters. They're not near to each other geographically, but they are connected, genetically. In this, and not only genetically, but there's a familial connection between them. How did the decision to write that relationship come about?
I think because it's an intense relationship and it's not a romantic one. And because they were going to be apart for the vast majority of the story, not having a romantic relationship at the heart of the story seemed like a good idea, because then they could each have a romantic relationship that'll work or not on their own. And I just felt like two people who are united not only by genetics and upbringing, but by this tragic incident that occurred during their teenage years was very interesting to me. I can't say why it came up or how it came up. It just did, and that's kind of part of the mystery of it. Sorry, I don't have for that one.
Do you, when you're writing a story like this, David, does the topic of writing a standalone versus a series, does that or I'm sure it does factor in at some point, but where does that usually factor into your writing process?
I early, because I firmly believe that you really have to write one thing that works before you dare consider anything else. And so I try very hard to focus on the thing in front of me and how do I make that a full and complete story. And if it turns out it can go on, or a character in it can go on, or there's some aspect of it that can go on, great. And if the world seems to want that and I have the energy and ideas for it, great. But I think, I'm sure some authors consider that right away and early on and go on to have a great successful series. I don't have that capacity. I feel overwhelmed enough by telling one good story that I try to focus on just that.
Aurora is available everywhere now. When you're hearing this, in Kindle edition or hardcover or audiobook. We talked about audiobooks earlier. David, have you heard any of the production of this book?
Yes, it's terrific. Rupert Friend, the actor Rupert Friend, read it beautifully. He read my first novel, Cold Storage, as well, and I think it's terrific. I recommend buy the hardcover, buy the audiobook, get it on your Kindle as well, because why not? That's my first.
Well, you need to have that Kindle edition so you can just pop it out when you're waiting at the doctor or whatever as well. So I endorse that 100%. Aurora available everywhere now. David, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you are presently doing and have done in the past, where can they find you online?
I'm on Instagram, DG Koepp on Instagram, or just type in my name. I also, if you're interested in screenplays, I have a website, davidkoepp.com, where I have a script archive of about 30 years of drafts that I uploaded. They're free. Have a look if you like. And it sort of keeps you posted on my various other activities. So check it out.
Fantastic. Aurora available everywhere now. Go grab it today at your local bookstore or on Amazon. David, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you, Hank. It was a pleasure.